And so now, how did you two meet?
We met through a manager that we both used to have. So.
Yeah, we met here in LA at the Hollywood Holiday Parade.
And Nick was wearing overalls.
Uh-huh. Did you like that or not?
I thought it was kind of funny.
Uh-huh.
For years, people thought they already knew the story. Two young pop stars, one reality show, and a marriage millions watched fall apart in front of the entire world. Nick Lachey was the cool older guy from a chart-topping boy band. Jessica Simpson was the 22-year-old superstar becoming bigger than anyone expected. Together, they looked like America's perfect couple. But behind the cameras, everything was quietly falling apart. Now, 20 years after their shocking divorce, Nick is finally revealing what really happened. The heartbreaking reason neither of them realized the marriage was ending until it was already too late. What truly destroyed one of Hollywood's most unforgettable relationships? How it all started. Before the cameras, before the drama, before the $10 million divorce settlement headlines, Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson were just two young musicians who fell for each other. Nick was already established. He was part of 98 Degrees, the boy band that competed for space on radio stations alongside the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC in the late 1990s. He had fans, hits, and a career that was humming along nicely. When he met Jessica Simpson, she was 18 years old, a church girl from Texas with a powerful voice and a father who managed her career. They started dating in 1999. Jessica was just launching her music career, and Nick was the older, more experienced guy in the industry. He was 28 when they got married. She was 22. That 6-year age gap matters more than it might seem. Jessica has talked openly about how young and naive she was. She grew up in a deeply religious home. She publicly committed to saving herself for marriage. Nick was older, had already been through the pressures of fame, and was far more settled. She was, by her own description, still figuring out who she was. They got engaged in February 2002 and married that October in a lavish Texas ceremony. By all accounts, they were genuinely in love. Jessica has said that Nick was her first love, her first everything, really. And that matters, because it shapes everything that happens next. When they got married, Nick was actually the bigger star. He had more money. 98 Degrees had a real fan base. Jessica was talented, but still climbing. Her father, Joe Simpson, reportedly told her she didn't need a prenup because Nick had more to lose than she did. That decision would come back in a very expensive way. The show that changed everything. In 2003, MTV approached the couple with an idea for a short reality series about married life. The original pitch was modest. A few episodes. A promotional vehicle for the music both Nick and Jessica were releasing at the time. A way to keep both names in the public conversation. Nobody, not the network, not the producers, not Nick, not Jessica, could have predicted what happened next. The show, titled Newlyweds, Nick and Jessica, premiered on August 19, 2003. The audience response was immediate and massive. Millions of viewers tuned in weekly to watch the couple manage daily life, disagreements, and all the small moments that make up a marriage. Nick has spoken about this on the podcast Richer Lives in 2025, describing the show as something that started as a tool to promote music albums. According to Nick, neither party had any expectation that it would become a defining piece of reality television history. The show took on a life of its own and grew far beyond anything either person signed up for. Jessica became the breakout star. The viewing audience connected with her warmth, spontaneity, and complete lack of a filter. The most memorable scene of the entire series involved Jessica holding up a can of tuna labeled Chicken of the Sea and genuinely questioning whether the contents were chicken or fish. The moment went everywhere. It became one of the most referenced television clips of the decade. The critical context here is something Jessica revealed years later. The ditzy persona on the show was not entirely natural. It was partly constructed. Jessica has described in interviews and in her memoir, Open Book, how she deliberately downplayed her own intelligence on camera because she wanted the audience to love Nick. The goal was to make Nick look patient, knowledgeable, and steady. Jessica wanted the world to see the fairy tale version of the marriage, with Nick as the hero. The strategy worked for the show. It did not work for Jessica's public reputation, which spent years carrying the dumb blonde label as a result. Jessica sacrificed the way the world perceived her in order to protect the image of the marriage and of Nick. The irony is that the show launched Jessica into an entirely different career trajectory anyway. A fashion line, a starring role in the Dukes of Hazzard, multiple platinum albums, a beauty brand. Jessica became a commercial juggernaut, and the show was the accelerant. Nick benefited from the show in a different way. The show introduced Nick to a broader audience, particularly men who related to the regular guy persona on screen. Nick has acknowledged that the show opened entertainment doors that music alone would not have opened. But the careers did not grow at the same pace or in the same direction. Jessica was becoming a billion-dollar brand. Nick was becoming a well-liked television personality. The gap in earning power, fame, and momentum widened with every passing month. That imbalance inside the marriage was a slow and quiet form of pressure. The cracks the cameras caught. Anyone watching Newlyweds closely could detect real friction beneath the entertainment. The tension was present on screen even when the show was at its most comedic. One episode showed a disagreement about the frequency of physical intimacy in the marriage, with Nick pushing for a number that Jessica did not appear to agree with on camera. The show producer, Sue Kolinsky, speaking to Complex magazine years later, described the two leads as very different people and confirmed that the tension between them was real, not manufactured for the audience. What the cameras could never capture was the emotional distance that was growing off-screen. Jessica was becoming one of the most recognizable celebrities in the country. Film sets, magazine shoots, endorsement deals, and public appearances filled the calendar. The time available for the marriage, just the two people, no microphones, no production crew, kept shrinking. By the third season of the show, the relationship had fundamentally changed. Every disagreement, every quiet stretch, every difficult conversation had to happen in a context where cameras were present or nearby. Processing problems privately, the way most couples can, was not an option. The show had removed the privacy that a struggling marriage needs. Outside pressures also entered the picture. In 2004, during production of The Dukes of Hazzard, reports emerged about a closeness between Jessica and co-star Johnny Knoxville. Jessica addressed the topic directly in Open Book, confirming the emotional connection, but also making clear that the distance inside the marriage with Nick had already formed before that situation developed. The outside connection was a consequence of what was already breaking, not the reason it broke. The show ended in March 2005. Jessica filed for divorce in December of that same year, just 7 months after the cameras stopped rolling. Nick has stated in multiple interviews that the end of the marriage came as a shock. According to accounts from the time, Jessica raised the subject of divorce after dinner, and Nick did not see it coming. The filing cited irreconcilable differences. The money mistake behind the divorce. The financial story of the divorce is one of the most misunderstood parts of the entire saga, and it starts with a decision made before the wedding. When Nick suggested the couple sign a prenuptial agreement before getting married, Jessica refused. The refusal was not strategic. It was emotional. Jessica was 22 years old, deeply in love, and interpreting the suggestion as a sign that Nick did not fully believe the marriage would last. At the time, Joe Simpson had reportedly advised against a prenup as well, partly because Nick held more financial value at that point in both careers. Jessica has spoken about this decision on the Dr. Oz show, describing the refusal as something that seemed obvious at the time to someone committed to the idea of forever. The belief was that real commitment did not require legal protection. By the time the divorce proceedings began, the financial picture had completely reversed. Jessica was worth an estimated $35 million. Nick was worth approximately $5 million. California is a community property state, meaning marital assets are typically split equally without a prenuptial agreement in place. Jessica has described the settlement process in Open Book without disclosing the exact number, noting that the legal team communicated a figure Nick was seeking and that Jessica instructed them to agree to it. The reasoning at the time was that the lost money could be earned back, And that turned out to be accurate. Reported figures from various outlets suggest Nick walked away with assets worth somewhere between $1.5 million and $10 million. The breakdown, according to Star magazine reporting at the time, included a 1.5% stake in Jessica Simpson Dessert Beauty, approximately $2 million from the sale of the marital home, $2.2 million in securities accounts, and a Ferrari that had been a gift during the marriage. Jessica later named the decision to skip the prenup as the single biggest financial mistake of her professional life, referencing it in a CNBC interview about financial regrets. The fashion empire Jessica went on to build eventually reached a reported valuation of over $200 million. Nick handled the end of the marriage with a kind of public dignity that defined how the industry remembered him afterward. There was no public criticism of Jessica. What Nick did produce was music. The 2006 album What's Left of Me was openly raw and clearly written in response to the divorce. The title track became the biggest solo single of Nick's career to that point. The album received an entire companion MTV special. It stands as one of the more emotionally honest public responses to heartbreak that pop music produced during that era. 20 years of silence. After the divorce was finalized in June 2006, Nick and Jessica stopped all contact. Not a hostile separation, more of a complete absence. No mutual appearances. For 2 decades, the two simply did not exist in the same space. Nick has confirmed this in various interviews, describing the relationship as something that was neither friendship nor animosity, just zero contact. Both built entirely new lives. Nick married Vanessa Manillo in 2011, and the couple went on to have 3 children, Camden, Brooklyn, and Phoenix. The two became co-hosts of the Netflix dating series Love is Blind, which launched in 2020 and became one of the most watched reality formats on the platform. The career reinvention was genuine and well-suited to the person Nick had become. Jessica married former NFL player Eric Johnson in 2014 after several years of dating. The couple had 3 children, Maxwell, Ace, and Birdie. The Jessica Simpson collection grew into one of the most commercially successful celebrity fashion brands in American retail history, generating over $1 billion in annual sales at its peak. The memoir Open Book, published in 2020, became a bestseller and gave the public a far more detailed and honest version of the story than the tabloids had ever provided. Then, on March 29, 2026, 20 years after the finalization of the divorce, Nick and Jessica ended up on the same commercial flight from Los Angeles to Kauai, Hawaii. The flight lasted 6.5 hours. Nick confirmed the encounter on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen shortly after. According to Nick, the full family groups were present. Nick was traveling with Vanessa and the 3 children. Jessica was seated beside Tina Simpson, the former mother-in-law. Eric Johnson and the children from the Jessica and Eric marriage were seated in a different section of the plane. Nick described the situation as strangely comfortable given the circumstances, emphasizing that all parties were respectful and that nothing unusual occurred. A source close to the situation told People magazine that a friendly conversation took place between Nick, Jessica, and Vanessa, describing the interaction as amicable and relaxed. TMZ reported a slightly different version of the initial moment, with a source claiming Jessica moved to a different seat upon first spotting Nick, and that Nick showed visible surprise at the encounter. 2 accounts, probably both partially accurate. The initial shock of seeing someone after 20 years of zero contact is understandable. The fact that things settled into a civil interaction over several hours says something about where both people are now. The Nick and Jessica narrative gets repeated in a familiar format. 2 celebrities, a reality show, a divorce. Both move on. Story over. But there is a layer to this story that gets consistently overlooked, and it matters. Jessica Simpson was 22 years old when the marriage began. Nick was 28. Jessica had never been in a serious adult relationship. The marriage and the reality show happened simultaneously. And in order to make that show work, to make the audience root for the marriage, Jessica deliberately made herself the punchline. The blonde who did not understand the tuna can label. The the wide-eyed newlywed who needed things explained. The entertainment came at the cost of a public image that Jessica spent the next decade trying to correct. Nick did not face any comparable public ridicule during that period. The media environment of the early 2000s was particularly cruel to young women in ways that simply did not apply to men in the same positions. News followed Jessica Wait. Magazine covers critiqued the way Jessica looked. The dumb blonde label got attached to every headline. None of that applied to Nick in any equivalent way. That asymmetry in how the world treated each person during and after the marriage is part of why the post-divorce trajectories look so different. Jessica had to fight to be taken seriously. Nick stepped away from the marriage with sympathy and relatability intact. The rebuilding Jessica had to do after 2006 was not just personal. It was a full reclamation of identity. In a 2025 interview with The Cut, Jessica described the period after the divorce as a time of discovering freedom and becoming the truest version of the person underneath all the performance. The fact that a billion-dollar business, a best-selling memoir, and 2 decades of genuine growth followed that period is not a footnote. That is the point. Nick, at 52, occupies a stable and respected position in the entertainment world. The Love is Blind role suits a version of Nick that the Newlyweds audience never fully saw: thoughtful, grounded, genuinely invested in helping couples navigate serious commitments. On The Ultimatum Season 3 in 2024, Nick used the experience of personal divorce to counsel a contestant through fears about marriage. The message was about not letting past pain prevent future connection. That is the message of someone who did the work. 20 years later, the marriage did not survive. Both people did. And that distinction matters more than the divorce itself. Where it really ends. Nick Lachey, now 52, is in a stable and active phase of his entertainment career. The marriage to Vanessa has lasted since 2011. The family of 5 is raising 3 children. Love is Blind continues as one of Netflix's most-watched unscripted formats. An upcoming 4-part documentary series titled Boy Band Confidential, set to air on Investigation Discovery and produced alongside Joey Fatone of NSYNC, adds another dimension to the career. The version of Nick that exists today is genuinely different from the version that appeared on Newlyweds, more mature, more reflective, and clearly more at peace with the past. Jessica Simpson, now 45, is in the middle of navigating a second major separation. The split from Eric Johnson became public in January 2005 after 10 years of marriage. As of 2026, the divorce process is ongoing, though both parties appear to be managing co-parenting of the 3 children in an amicable way. Reports from early 2026 indicate Jessica has begun a new relationship with a Nashville-based musician named Thomas Eisenhood. In a joint interview with sister Ashley Simpson Ross for The Cut in February 2025, Jessica drew a direct parallel between the current situation and the divorce from Nick 2 decades earlier. The observation was that, at 25, the dissolution of the marriage felt like the end of everything. From the current vantage point, it turned out to be the beginning of the most productive and self-defined period of life. That perspective is the thread connecting both stories. The Hawaii flight, the scars Nick mentioned on The Ultimatum, the open acknowledgement from Jessica that the first divorce was both the most painful and most important reset of the entire career. The unexpected 6-hour flight to Hawaii in 2026 was not a romantic reunion. It was not a dramatic confrontation. It was 2 adults, 20 years of separate growth behind both of them, sitting in the same pressurized cabin somewhere over the Pacific and handling it fine. That is not a small thing. That is what healing actually looks like. Nearly 20 years later, the story of Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson still fascinates millions because behind the fame, cameras, and headlines were 2 people trying to survive a relationship under non-stop pressure. Some wounds clearly never fully healed. What do you think really destroyed their marriage? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this.